The cameras of the world often turn toward scandal, but some stories carry an electricity so powerful that they don't just make headlines, they detonate like cultural earthquakes. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex turned Hollywood producer, thought she had found her stage with her Netflix series, With Love Meghan. Season 1 promised reinvention, intimacy, and storytelling rooted in what she called authenticity. It was supposed to be the next big chapter of her life outside palace walls. But by the time Season 2 hit the airwaves, it was already clear she was skating on fragile ice. Critics were circling, whispers were growing louder, and then Megyn Kelly, one of the most unflinching voices in American media, stepped forward and lit a match that sent the whole thing up in flames. The clash between Meghan and Megyn was not an accident. It was a collision of two women who thrive on narrative control, but from opposite ends of the spectrum. Meghan has spent years trying to curate her image, building a carefully staged public persona where every word, every glance, every camera angle is orchestrated. Megyn Kelly has spent years demolishing facades, calling out hypocrisy, and reveling in the chaos that erupts when sacred cows are slaughtered in public view. When Kelly branded Meghan's Netflix series not With Love Meghan, but With Lies Meghan, she wasn't just mocking a show. She was ripping open the fragile stitches that Meghan had worked so hard to sew into her Hollywood identity. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This video begins with that moment of rupture because it tells us something essential about modern celebrity, media warfare, and the delicate balance of truth and perception. Think about it. What happens when a woman who once lived inside Buckingham Palace now finds herself being ridiculed on live television for manufacturing stories about her own life? What happens when her answer isn't a witty comeback or a graceful brush-off, but a threat of a lawsuit? Those are the stakes, and they're far bigger than gossip. This is a battle over credibility, over reputation, over whether Meghan Markle is building a legacy or burying herself under the weight of her own narratives. Let's rewind for a moment. Season 2 of With Love Meghan was meant to solidify Meghan as a force in the entertainment world. Netflix poured millions into it because they believed that the intrigue surrounding Meghan and Harry wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was marketable drama with global reach. Cameras followed Meghan through carefully arranged scenes of family life, activism, and emotional vulnerability. On the surface, it was supposed to be inspirational, a story of resilience and empowerment. But beneath the glossy edits, viewers began to notice something odd. Storylines shifted depending on which episode you watched. Events were framed in ways that contradicted earlier public accounts. Characters from her past either appeared as glowing allies or were conspicuously absent. It didn't take long for whispers to form. Was Meghan retelling history, bending truth into entertainment? That's when Megyn Kelly stepped in. For years, Kelly has been called everything from fearless to brutal. Her audience expects her to cut through sentiment and go for the jugular. When she devoted an entire segment of her show to tearing apart With Love Meghan, she did so with the precision of a surgeon and the flair of a showman. She laughed, she rolled clips, she asked pointed questions, and then she dropped the line that went viral within minutes. It's not With Love Meghan, it's With Lies Meghan. That phrase ricocheted across social media platforms, trending for days. Memes multiplied, late-night comedians borrowed it, and suddenly Meghan's multi-million-dollar project was being reduced to a punchline. The middle of this story is where the tension climbs. Because Meghan Markle is not just any celebrity. She is someone who has spent years fighting what she calls unfair press, legal battles with tabloids, and public scrutiny from the royal establishment itself. She knows the power of lawsuits. She knows the chilling effect of legal letters. So when reports surfaced that Meghan was furious with Kelly's comments and was actively considering legal action, the temperature shifted. What had been an entertainment spat became something more explosive. This wasn't just one woman mocking another on TV. This was about free speech, defamation, and the fragile line between criticism and libel. Imagine the scene inside Meghan's California mansion. Advisors pacing the room, lawyers drafting potential responses, Harry caught in the middle wondering if another public fight is worth the toll. For Meghan, the lawsuit talk wasn't only about silencing Kelly. It was about sending a message that she would no longer tolerate being publicly dismantled, that her work, however staged or dramatized, was her truth. But here's the irony. By threatening legal action, she risked confirming exactly what her critics accused her of: overreacting, being overly litigious, and unable to handle tough criticism. Megyn Kelly, of course, knew this. And as she doubled down, mocking the idea that Meghan could sue her for simply offering an opinion, the spotlight grew hotter. The public reaction was seismic. On one side, supporters of Meghan rallied to her defense, calling Kelly cruel, jealous, and opportunistic. They argued that Meghan was an easy target, that women in power always face harsher backlash, that her attempt to share her story was being unfairly trashed. On the other side, Kelly's followers and Meghan's detractors saw it differently. To them, Kelly had finally said out loud what many people were thinking: that Meghan's Netflix saga was more soap opera than documentary, more performance than truth. And if Meghan wanted to take her to court over it, that was proof enough that the Duchess couldn't take a joke or a hard truth. As the dust settled on those first few explosive days, one thing was clear: this wasn't going to blow over quickly. Media analysts started dissecting the feud, legal experts weighed in on Meghan's chances of winning a defamation suit, and social media platforms became battlefields of hashtags and think pieces. Even the silence of the royal family, who had no public comment, became part of the narrative. Was their silence tacit approval? Were they secretly amused that someone else was finally calling Meghan out? Or were they watching nervously, aware that any misstep could reignite tensions across the Atlantic? And here lies the end of the introduction, the place where the story leaves you on the edge of your seat. Because this clash between Meghan Markle and Megyn Kelly is not just about a Netflix series. It's about power. It's about who gets to define truth in a world where storytelling is currency. It's about a duchess who believes her narrative is her shield, and a media powerhouse who believes it's her job to pierce that shield for the world to see. The next chapters will take you deeper into the lawsuit threats, the behind-the-scenes fallout, the role of Harry, the silence of the royals, and the way Netflix found itself in the middle of a storm it never planned for. But the question lingering over all of it is the one we'll keep circling back to. Is Meghan defending her truth or running from it? And in trying to silence a critic, is she only giving more oxygen to the very mockery she hoped to extinguish? Not with controversy, but with ambition. Before the fights with broadcasters, before the hashtags, before Megyn Kelly sharpened her tongue and went viral, there was the original dream. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, newly separated from royal duties, had entered the world of entertainment with an enormous splash. Netflix saw gold in the couple. To the streaming giant, Meghan and Harry weren't just a couple stepping away from tradition. They were a brand, a global sensation with the ability to sell stories, stir debate, and attract audiences across continents. The deal they signed in 2020 was worth staggering sums, rumored to be $100 million. It promised documentaries, children's shows, and content that would redefine what it meant to be a royal outside the palace walls. At the center of this bold venture was a project that Meghan insisted would show her heart, her voice, her perspective. That project would later be branded as With Love Meghan. Season 1 was a glossy introduction, a production designed to present Meghan not as a duchess bound by tradition, but as a modern woman charting her own destiny. Every frame was polished, every storyline carried emotional beats designed to humanize her, and every episode tried to weave together the narrative of a woman wronged by a rigid monarchy, but redeemed through resilience. Viewers saw her laughing in her California home, sharing anecdotes about motherhood, speaking about her activism, and reflecting on her journey with Harry by her side. It was positioned as a love letter to her life after the crown, an intimate portrayal of struggle, reinvention, and empowerment. The world reacted with fascination. Supporters praised the honesty, the vulnerability, and the way Meghan seemed to peel back the curtain on an institution famous for secrecy. They applauded the courage it took to share her version of events after years of tabloid vitriol. But there was another current flowing beneath the applause, one less forgiving. Critics pointed out how staged some scenes appeared, how rehearsed certain conversations sounded, and how selective the storytelling seemed. They noted what was left out: the tension with Harry's family, contradictions between her statements and earlier interviews, and the unmistakable sense that every moment was curated for maximum sympathy. Even then, the word fabrication began to surface quietly in some corners. Yet the ratings told a different story. Millions tuned in. For Netflix, this was success. For Meghan, it was vindication. Season 1 gave her a platform, a sense of ownership over her story. She had, at least for a moment, shifted the narrative. But momentum in entertainment is fragile. For every fan willing to embrace her truth, there were others skeptical, waiting for cracks to appear. That skepticism formed the backdrop for Season 2, a season that promised to expand, to go deeper, to turn Meghan from a symbol into a storyteller. It was here that the seeds of future conflict were planted. Season 2 was marketed as more daring, more intimate, and more revealing than the first. Netflix poured resources into it, hiring directors, writers, and consultants who could shape Meghan's life into episodic arcs. Meghan herself reportedly became deeply involved in every stage, from script to edit. She wasn't just the star, she was the architect. She wanted control, and she had it. The show followed her activism more closely, reenacted moments from her royal life, and brought in voices from her past who reinforced her version of events. It was meant to be her definitive narrative, the one that drowned out the tabloids and redefined her public image once and for all. But the more control Meghan exerted, the more the product seemed to carry her fingerprints. To supporters, this was authenticity. To critics, it was manipulation. For every tear shed on camera, there were whispers behind the scenes about exaggerated timelines, about past acquaintances who refused to participate because they disagreed with her portrayal, about the blurred line between documentary and scripted drama. As soon as the first episodes dropped, headlines began appearing. Some praised the courage of a woman reclaiming her story. Others scoffed, calling it self-indulgent, even narcissistic. And in between were millions of ordinary viewers, uncertain what to believe. Harry's role in Season 1 had been significant, but in Season 2, he began to fade into the background. Meghan took center stage, narrating not just her life with him, but her broader worldview. This shift was deliberate, a choice to define herself outside of her husband. But it also opened her to more criticism. Detractors claimed she wanted the spotlight entirely on herself, that she was using Harry as a stepping stone rather than a partner. Supporters countered that it was refreshing to see a woman carve her own path, even while married to one of the most famous men alive. The tension around her independence became part of the larger narrative of the season. Then came the reception. Social media lit up as fans and critics dissected each episode. Supporters created fan edits, praising her strength, posting quotes that inspired them. Critics made parodies, mocking the melodrama and pointing out inconsistencies. Some compared the series to Keeping Up with the Kardashians with a royal twist, a show that blurred the line between reality and performance until it was impossible to tell where truth ended and acting began. It was within this climate that Megyn Kelly found her opening. But before Kelly delivered her devastating blow, it is important to understand why Meghan's series mattered so much. It wasn't just entertainment. It was part of a broader strategy. Meghan and Harry had lost the protective embrace of the monarchy. Their financial independence depended on deals like the one with Netflix. Their relevance in global conversations depended on their ability to tell stories people would watch. For Meghan, this wasn't just about her voice. It was about survival. Failure meant ridicule, diminished influence, and questions about whether they could stand outside the royal orbit. Success meant power, autonomy, and the ability to silence doubters. That weight hung over Season 2 like an unspoken cloud. Every scene wasn't just television. It was an audition for a permanent place in Hollywood. Every review wasn't just feedback. It was a referendum on Meghan's worth outside the palace gates. It is here that Chapter 1 leaves us, at the edge of triumph and vulnerability, with Meghan basking in the glow of creative control while unknowingly walking straight into the storm that would define the months ahead. The rise of With Love Meghan was not the story of a simple television series. It was the story of a woman trying to rewrite her identity on the largest stage possible, using the world's most powerful streaming service as her pen. But identity wars have consequences, especially when your critics are as relentless as your fans are loyal. And in the background, Megyn Kelly was sharpening her words, waiting to strike at the heart of everything Meghan had built, with a sense of anticipation that was almost cinematic in itself. By the time Season 2 of With Love Meghan was announced, The press machine was in full gear. Trailers rolled out with sweeping music, lingering shots of Meghan looking contemplative in sunlit gardens, Harry's voice chiming in with supportive phrases, and a promise that this new season would be bolder, rawer, and more revealing than the first. Netflix teased viewers with clips of Meghan reflecting on her struggles, shots of private family life that were meant to feel intimate, and soundbites crafted to make headlines. The air was thick with expectation, because this was not just another streaming series. It was the continuation of a narrative that had already divided the world. From the very first episode, reactions began pouring in. Supporters rushed online, praising Meghan for her courage and her willingness to lay bare her life once more. They saw her as a woman reclaiming her story, refusing to be silenced by the palace or by the tabloids. For them, Season 2 was not entertainment, it was vindication. But alongside this applause came a new wave of skepticism, harsher than what accompanied Season 1. Critics who had already doubted the authenticity of the first season now pounced on every frame of the second. They claimed the episodes were not only carefully staged but deliberately misleading, painting Meghan as both victim and heroine in scenarios that raised more questions than they answered. The early backlash centered on a few key elements. One was the way Meghan framed her departure from royal life. In previous interviews, she and Harry had provided one version of events. In the new season, the details seemed to shift. Timelines didn't match. Statements she made about specific incidents conflicted with earlier accounts. To some viewers, this was evidence of the natural evolution of memory. To her critics, it was proof that she was rewriting history for dramatic effect. Another flashpoint was the portrayal of her relationships with friends and colleagues from her past. The series painted her as a loyal friend abandoned by many after her marriage, but several individuals publicly contradicted this, saying they chose distance because they felt Meghan used relationships strategically. What struck viewers most was the tone of the show. Where Season 1 carried the sheen of introduction, Season 2 had the flair of melodrama. The camera lingered longer on tears, the music swelled louder at emotional moments, and the pacing felt designed less for truth and more for effect. This wasn't lost on audiences accustomed to reality television. Comparisons to soap operas and scripted reality shows like The Hills or even the Kardashians franchise began popping up on Twitter and Reddit. The irony was glaring. Meghan had often condemned the tabloids for turning her life into spectacle, yet here she seemed to be packaging that same spectacle for global streaming audiences. Netflix executives, at least in the early days, defended the project. For them, the numbers mattered most, and the initial wave of viewership was strong. The controversy itself drove engagement. Clips circulated widely, debates raged on morning talk shows, and social media algorithms pushed Meghan-related content into trending columns. To Netflix, controversy was currency. But to Meghan, the backlash carried a different weight. She wanted admiration, respect, and validation. What she was getting was parody, ridicule, and growing whispers that her so-called documentary was more performance than reality. The backlash didn't just come from the usual critics. Mainstream outlets that had once offered sympathetic coverage now published sharper takes. Opinion pieces appeared in respected newspapers asking whether Meghan's project was harming her credibility. Analysts began questioning whether her attempt to dominate Hollywood storytelling was backfiring, creating a gap between the image she wanted and the perception viewers actually held. Even supporters quietly admitted that certain scenes felt overly curated, that the line between authentic storytelling and manipulation was becoming harder to define. Another layer of backlash came from within royal circles, though not directly. The palace maintained its usual silence, but sources close to royal aides whispered to journalists about their frustration with how Meghan depicted events. These sources claimed that her version of events was not only exaggerated but insulting to the people who had once worked to support her. They argued that history was being rewritten on camera to paint Meghan as a solitary victim while ignoring the nuances of what had actually taken place. Though the palace never made an official statement, the quiet murmurs only added to the public suspicion that Meghan's storytelling was less about truth and more about control. Social media fueled the fire in ways that traditional outlets could never match. Clips of Meghan crying or delivering dramatic lines were clipped, remixed, and set to mocking captions. The hashtag #WithLiesMeghan began appearing even before Megyn Kelly's devastating commentary. Younger audiences, quick to turn serious moments into viral jokes, turned entire episodes into meme fodder. For every heartfelt fan account defending Meghan, there were 5 parody accounts mocking the production quality, the music cues, or the contradictions in her story. The cultural tide was shifting, and Meghan found herself in the middle of a storm she couldn't easily control. Harry's presence in Season 2 also sparked commentary. While he appeared supportive, his reduced screen time raised questions. Was this Meghan's show alone now? Was Harry being sidelined? Or was this a deliberate attempt by Meghan to carve out her own identity independent of him? Observers debated whether Harry looked comfortable, whether he seemed reluctant, and whether the marriage itself was being strained under the weight of Meghan's Hollywood ambitions. While no concrete evidence suggested trouble between them, the speculation added yet another layer of noise around the series. For Meghan, the backlash must have felt like déjà vu. She had left the palace in part to escape relentless criticism, yet here she was again, facing it from new corners. The difference now was that she no longer had the shield of royal protocol. Every comment, every review, every joke landed directly on her reputation, without the buffer of monarchy to absorb the blows. She had chosen to step into the entertainment world, and in that world, scrutiny was not only relentless but unforgiving. Once audiences began to doubt your authenticity, every subsequent project carried the weight of suspicion. By the time the season had been streaming for a few weeks, the conversation had shifted almost entirely. It was no longer about whether Meghan's story was inspiring, but whether it was believable. That distinction mattered. Audiences will forgive flaws, but they rarely forgive feeling manipulated. And as more commentators began calling the series a carefully choreographed drama rather than a genuine documentary, Meghan's credibility faced its greatest challenge yet. The seeds of mockery had been planted, waiting for a single strong voice to articulate what many already suspected. That voice was about to come from Megyn Kelly, whose entrance into the debate would turn skepticism into ridicule and backlash into open war. This chapter closes with that sense of anticipation, the pause before the strike. Season 2 had arrived with grand promises, but left the door wide open to criticism. Meghan had delivered her version of truth, but truth in the age of streaming is fragile. All it takes is one well-aimed phrase to shatter it. And somewhere in a New York studio, Megyn Kelly was preparing that phrase, a sharp line that would take Meghan's carefully built brand and drag it into the fire of public mockery. With the entrance of a figure who thrives in controversy, someone who has built a career not just on reporting stories, but on challenging, dismantling, and sometimes mocking the very people who dominate headlines. Megyn Kelly, former Fox News anchor turned independent broadcaster and podcaster, had already cemented her reputation as a woman unafraid of confrontation. For years, she had faced down political giants, Hollywood icons, and cultural movements that most media figures would tiptoe around. Love her or hate her, Megyn Kelly had mastered the art of provocation, and when she set her sights on Meghan Markle's latest Netflix offering, it wasn't just another celebrity critique. It was a calculated takedown designed to strike at the core of Meghan's public persona. Kelly's style has always been blunt. She doesn't couch her words in politeness. She sharpens them into weapons. By the time Season 2 of With Love Meghan hit Netflix, Kelly had already voiced skepticism about Meghan in past segments. She had criticized her Oprah interview, questioned her accounts of royal life, and mocked what she saw as contradictions in Meghan's narrative. To Kelly, Meghan represented the epitome of a curated celebrity image, a woman who claimed victimhood while simultaneously leveraging fame for influence and wealth. When the second season dropped and began attracting both viewers and ridicule, Kelly saw the perfect opportunity to frame the conversation in her own words. On her show, Megyn Kelly didn't just review the series. She dissected it. With clips playing behind her, she ridiculed what she called the stage dramatics, the emotional manipulation, and the selective editing. Her voice carried the authority of someone who has seen countless political and media spin attempts, and she wasn't shy about calling out what she believed was the same kind of spin dressed up as documentary. She laughed at certain moments, rolled her eyes at others, and asked rhetorical questions designed to echo the skepticism many viewers already felt. And then came the line that would ignite the storm. "It's not with love, Meghan. It's with lies, Meghan." In that instant, she transformed criticism into a viral slogan. That phrase was devastatingly effective because it was simple, memorable, and it framed the entire series in a single blow. Within minutes, social media lit up with the hashtag #WithLiesMeghan. Viewers who had already been mocking the show now had a rallying cry. Memes proliferated, commentary spread, and even news outlets began quoting the line in headlines. What Meghan had hoped would be a triumphant cultural moment was now branded with a mocking nickname that threatened to overshadow everything else. Kelly hadn't just critiqued the content. She had reframed it in a way that stuck to Meghan's image like glue. Why did Kelly's words resonate so powerfully? Part of the answer lies in timing. The backlash against Season 2 was already simmering, with audiences questioning its authenticity. Kelly gave that skepticism a voice, packaged it in a way that was easy to repeat, and delivered it with her trademark confidence. But another part lies in Kelly's own reputation. She was not a gossip columnist or a random internet troll. She was a seasoned broadcaster whose critiques carried weight in mainstream discourse. When she labeled the show a soap opera masquerading as truth, it wasn't dismissed as petty. It was analyzed, debated, and amplified across platforms. Kelly's commentary didn't stop at one line. She argued that Meghan was trying to control the narrative of her life in the same way politicians try to control public perception, and she warned that the truth always emerges eventually. She compared the series to reality television designed to manipulate emotions rather than present facts. And she questioned why Meghan, who had often spoken of valuing privacy, would so willingly put private life on global display while demanding that others respect her boundaries. These points struck at the very heart of Meghan's strategy. Was she genuinely sharing her story, or was she packaging a version of it that served her ambitions? That question lingered long after Kelly's segment ended. Behind the scenes, media insiders recognized the brilliance of Kelly's move. In a crowded media environment where thousands of voices compete for attention, Kelly had managed to crystallize the conversation into a single phrase that everyone could repeat. It was marketing judo. Take the opponent's product, flip the branding, and turn it against them. For Meghan, the timing couldn't have been worse. She was already fighting skepticism, already facing the pressure of proving herself in Hollywood, and now she had to contend with a media heavyweight reducing her project to a punchline. The ripple effect was immediate. Other commentators, from late-night hosts to YouTube analysts, began borrowing the phrase. Headlines blared with "Lies, Meghan," further entrenching the label in public consciousness. Even those who hadn't watched the show now understood the criticism through Kelly's framing. Meghan's multi-million-dollar project had been redefined not by Netflix's marketing team, not by her own narrative, but by a rival media personality with a knack for cutting through the noise. The balance of power in storytelling had shifted, and Meghan was suddenly on the defensive. What makes this chapter especially significant is the cultural backdrop against which it unfolded. Meghan Markle and Megyn Kelly represent two sides of a broader societal debate. Meghan embodies the modern celebrity who seeks to control her own story, leveraging media platforms to present curated authenticity. Megyn Kelly represents the skeptical observer who calls out perceived contradictions, wielding cynicism as a tool to puncture celebrity facades. Their collision was inevitable, because both occupy spaces where control of narrative equals power. Meghan needs audiences to believe her truth to sustain her career. Kelly thrives on questioning that truth, knowing that audiences crave someone who will say what others won't. As Kelly's words reverberated, Meghan reportedly reacted with fury. Insiders claimed she saw the mockery not just as unfair, but as deeply damaging to her brand. The idea that her carefully crafted series could be dismissed so easily by a single broadcaster enraged her. And so the stage was set for the next escalation. The talk of legal action, the possibility of lawsuits, and the brewing storm that would pit a duchess against a broadcaster in a battle not just for reputation, but for dominance in the court of public opinion. Chapter 3 closes with Kelly standing tall, her words echoing across platforms, and Meghan retreating into strategy meetings with advisors and lawyers. The mockery had become more than just a joke. It was a cultural moment that defined the season and set the stage for the legal and emotional fireworks to come. The next chapter will dive into Meghan's fury behind closed doors, exploring how a woman who built her identity on controlling narratives confronted the sudden realization that sometimes one phrase from a rival can unravel years of careful storytelling. With the sound of laughter echoing across social media timelines, a chorus that grew louder with each passing hour. Megyn Kelly's remark had landed like a thunderclap, and almost instantly, the phrase "with lies Meghan" began to circulate far beyond the walls of Kelly's studio. What had started as a single broadcaster mocking Meghan's Netflix series now spiraled into a global joke, one that threatened to drown out everything Meghan had hoped to achieve with Season 2 of With Love Meghan. It is one thing to face criticism in a review column or to endure questions in a press conference, but it is another thing entirely to become the punchline of a meme cycle. Meghan Markle found herself in the middle of that storm, and she was woefully unprepared for the speed with which the internet could weaponize ridicule. The mockery began in predictable places. Kelly's regular viewers clipped the segment and shared it on platforms like Twitter and YouTube. Within minutes, the phrase became a trending topic. But it didn't stop there. Comedy accounts latched onto it, pairing the words "with lies Meghan" with still shots from the series. One viral post showed Meghan seated dramatically in a lush garden, captioned with the new title splashed across the screen like a parody poster. Another spliced clips from the series with laugh tracks, transforming moments meant to be poignant into scenes of comedy. The internet, as it often does, took the spark and turned it into a bonfire. Traditional media outlets joined the chorus. Morning talk shows referenced Kelly's phrase in their coverage, some with amusement, others with analysis. Headlines began adopting the term, often with quotation marks, but always in a way that reinforced its spread. Late-night hosts incorporated it into their monologues, poking fun at Meghan while drawing laughs from their studio audiences. The damage was not just in the humor. It was in the way Kelly's phrase began to frame the narrative. Instead of discussing the content of the series, people discussed whether Meghan was lying. Instead of evaluating her storytelling, the public debated whether her credibility could survive being branded a fabricator. Inside Meghan's camp, the reaction was one of disbelief and anger. Advisors reportedly scrambled to figure out how to respond. Public relations experts warned against directly addressing the mockery, fearing it would give it even more attention. Others argued that silence would be interpreted as weakness, that Meghan needed to push back and defend herself. Meghan herself, according to sources close to her, was livid. She had poured time, money, and emotional energy into crafting the series, only to see it dismissed with a single mocking line. To her, Kelly's words weren't just a joke, they were an attack on her integrity. The fury inside her California home contrasted sharply with the amusement playing out online. For Meghan, every meme felt like a knife, every parody another reminder that her efforts to reshape her narrative were slipping out of her control. For Kelly, however, the reaction was proof of her power. She reveled in the attention, knowing that her phrase had achieved what every broadcaster dreams of, cultural stickiness. The more Meghan's supporters tried to argue against it, the more the phrase "with lies Meghan" spread. In the court of public opinion, Kelly had seized the advantage. What made the mockery especially potent was that it tapped into existing doubts. Many viewers were already skeptical of Meghan's version of events. Kelly had not invented criticism, she had crystallized it. By labeling the series a fabrication, she gave voice to the unease people felt but had not articulated. This resonance made the ridicule harder for Meghan to combat. She could issue statements, threaten lawsuits, or ignore the noise, but none of those strategies could erase the seed of doubt planted in people's minds. Once credibility is questioned publicly, it rarely returns unscathed. The fallout extended beyond Meghan's personal brand. Netflix executives were reportedly alarmed at how quickly the mockery overshadowed their investment. What had been marketed as a serious documentary was now being dismissed as a soap opera, while the streaming giant appreciated the surge in attention. After all, controversy drives viewership. They also recognized the long-term risk. If their high-profile talent became associated with ridicule rather than respect, it could diminish the value of future projects. Internally, debates erupted over whether to defend Meghan publicly or to quietly distance themselves from her brand. The tension between financial gain and reputational risk added another layer to the unfolding drama. public reaction was not monolithic. While many mocked Meghan, her defenders fought back. Hashtags appeared in her support, calling Kelly a bully and accusing her of targeting Meghan because of race, gender, or jealousy. Influencers and fans posted lengthy threads defending Meghan's authenticity and praising her willingness to be vulnerable. But even these defenses often used Kelly's phrase, inadvertently reinforcing it. In trying to fight the fire, they fed it oxygen. The cultural conversation had been set, and Meghan was struggling to shift it. The international angle added further complications. British tabloids seized on Kelly's words with glee, framing them as validation of years of critical coverage. In the United States, media outlets debated whether Meghan was unfairly targeted or whether she had brought the backlash upon herself by overplaying her hand. In other countries, the feud was covered less as entertainment and more as a case study in media dynamics. How quickly a powerful broadcaster could derail a celebrity's carefully crafted image. The global attention ensured that Meghan's humiliation was not confined to one market. It was everywhere, unavoidable, inescapable. One of the most striking aspects of the mockery was how it blurred the lines between entertainment and politics. Kelly, though a media personality, often positioned herself as a cultural commentator, someone who could cut through celebrity glamour with blunt honesty. Meghan, though a celebrity, carried the weight of royalty and activism, positioning herself as more than just an entertainer. Their clash became symbolic of larger debates: authenticity versus performance, truth versus perception, control versus exposure. Viewers weren't just laughing at a Netflix series. They were participating in a broader cultural reckoning about who gets to define reality. As the laughter grew louder, Meghan's options narrowed. Threats of legal action began to surface, as whispers spread that she was consulting with lawyers about whether Kelly's words crossed into defamation. For Meghan, the stakes were not just about silencing a critic, but about reclaiming control over her image. Yet the risk of suing was enormous. Legal experts noted that in defamation cases, the burden of proof is high, especially for public figures. Any lawsuit would invite scrutiny of Meghan's claims in the series, potentially exposing inconsistencies to even greater public examination. In seeking to protect her reputation, she risked destroying it further. By the end of the first week after Kelly's segment, Meghan's series was no longer being judged on its own merits. It was being judged through the lens of ridicule. The internet had spoken, and the verdict was merciless. Meghan's fury behind closed doors was understandable. She had lost control of the story she had worked so hard to tell. Kelly, meanwhile, was unscathed, her audience emboldened, her cultural relevance reinforced. The stage was set for escalation, because if Meghan could not tolerate mockery, and Kelly refused to back down, the conflict was destined to grow more explosive. Chapter 4 closes with Meghan standing at a crossroads. On one side was silence, which risked allowing the ridicule to calcify into permanent perception. On the other side was confrontation, which risked amplifying the very mockery she despised. It was a no-win situation, a trap from which the only escape might be reinvention. But Meghan was not ready to concede. In her world, every battle was worth fighting, especially one that threatened to define her legacy. And so, with anger in her heart and lawyers on speed dial, she prepared to push back. The world had laughed, but the fight was far from over. With a scene far from the bright lights of television studios or the polished halls of Netflix's headquarters, it unfolds inside Meghan and Harry's Montecito mansion, where the mood shifted from frustration to outright fury the moment Megyn Kelly's words began trending worldwide. Meghan was reportedly pacing, phone in hand, scrolling through a sea of posts that mocked her series with the phrase "with lies Meghan" stamped across still shots from her show. The more she scrolled, the angrier she became. For someone who had worked tirelessly to present herself as a figure of authenticity and empowerment, seeing her project reduced to a punchline felt like betrayal, humiliation, and sabotage all rolled into one. The fury wasn't just about Kelly's words. It was about the speed with which they spread. Meghan had always known the power of media, but this was different. This wasn't a critical article buried in the opinion section of a newspaper. This was ridicule amplified by millions of voices in real time, leaving her without control of the narrative. Every hour, more memes appeared, more late-night hosts picked up the joke, and more headlines used the label. She could feel the walls of perception closing in, suffocating the brand she had tried to build. For someone who believed in narrative as power, the loss of that power was intolerable. Inside the house, her team scrambled to manage the crisis. Advisors debated strategy around the kitchen island, each voice rising above the next. One urged calm, arguing that the ridicule would fade if ignored. Another insisted they needed to respond immediately, framing Kelly as cruel and biased. Meghan rejected the idea of silence outright. To her, doing nothing meant surrendering, allowing the label to stick forever. She demanded options, legal or otherwise, that could silence the mockery and force the conversation back onto her terms. Lawyers were looped into late-night calls. Legal memos were drafted, dissecting whether Kelly's remarks crossed into defamation. Meghan asked pointed questions about what it would take to sue, what damages could be claimed, and how quickly action could be taken. The lawyers cautioned her. Defamation, especially in the United States, is notoriously difficult to prove. As a public figure, Meghan would bear the heavy burden of showing actual malice, that Kelly knowingly spread falsehoods rather than offering an opinion. Kelly's phrase, though cutting, was legally couched as commentary, not fact. A lawsuit would likely fail, and worse, it could backfire by amplifying the very narrative Meghan wanted to bury. But logic rarely calms fury. Meghan's emotions ran hotter than legal reasoning. She was less concerned with courtroom odds than with the principle of the matter. In her view, Kelly wasn't just mocking her show, she was undermining her credibility as a woman, as a mother, and as a public figure. She saw the ridicule as part of a pattern of attacks against her since joining the royal family. One more example of the world trying to silence her truth. Threatening legal action was not just about winning in court. It was about sending a message that she would not be bullied. Harry's presence during these discussions added tension of its own. On one hand, he wanted to support his wife. On the other, he had long cautioned against engaging in battles that only fed the tabloids. He remembered their lawsuits against British papers, the endless headlines that followed, and the toll it took on their family. To him, Kelly's mockery was another storm to be weathered, not fought head-on. But Meghan was determined, and Harry, caught between his instinct to retreat and his loyalty to her, found himself reluctantly listening as she insisted that they prepare for a fight. In the days that followed, Meghan's fury translated into strategy sessions that blurred the line between personal outrage and professional calculation. Advisors began drafting talking points, exploring ways to frame Kelly as part of a broader culture of misogyny and unfair scrutiny. They debated whether to release a public statement condemning the mockery or to leak stories to sympathetic outlets portraying Meghan as the victim of a media smear. Meghan, however, remained fixated on the legal path. She wanted Kelly to feel pressure, to know that her words carried consequences. Even if no lawsuit was ultimately filed, the threat of one could be enough to shift the conversation. The atmosphere in the mansion was tense, with phones buzzing constantly, emails flying, and aides whispering in hallways about the severity of the crisis. Meghan, always sensitive to how she was portrayed, demanded daily updates on how the phrase was trending, which outlets were covering it, and what allies were saying in her defense. Each new meme, each mocking headline reignited her anger, making her more resolved to fight. For those around her, it was clear, this was no passing irritation. This was personal. The irony was not lost on observers outside her circle. Meghan had built her reputation in part on challenging the media, claiming to want a healthier, more honest public conversation. Yet here she was, considering silencing a critic through legal threats. To her detractors, this proved Kelly's point, that Meghan wanted control, not truth, and that anyone who disrupted her narrative would be met with retaliation. To her supporters, however, Meghan's fury was justified. They argued that Kelly's mockery wasn't harmless commentary, but an attempt to discredit a woman who had endured years of unfair treatment. The wider world only saw glimpses of Meghan's anger, mostly through leaks that painted her as deeply unsettled. Insiders whispered to tabloids that she was raging, inconsolable, and determined to respond. These leaks, whether intentional or not, fueled the perception that Meghan was preparing for a dramatic escalation. Meanwhile, Kelly doubled down, repeating her criticisms in follow-up broadcasts, mocking the idea that Meghan could sue her, and reveling in the ratings bump the controversy brought her. For Kelly, Meghan's fury was proof of victory. For Meghan, Kelly's defiance was proof that she needed to act. The mockery, the legal debates, the tension with Harry, and the constant swirl of media coverage created an atmosphere of siege inside Meghan's home. She saw herself as a woman under attack, her integrity questioned, her hard work reduced to a joke. But fury can be a dangerous guide. The more she focused on silencing Kelly, the more she risked amplifying her voice. The stage was set for a clash not just between two women, but between two strategies of power, one rooted in control of narrative, the other rooted in dismantling it. Chapter 5 ends with Meghan standing before a decision. Would she escalate by sending formal legal letters, risking more attention and potentially a humiliating courtroom battle? Or would she attempt to redirect the narrative through public relations, trying to reclaim sympathy from the audience now laughing at her expense? Her fury was undeniable, her determination absolute, but the path forward was fraught with peril. Every option carried risk, every move invited scrutiny. And yet, for Meghan, doing nothing was unthinkable. The next chapter would reveal whether her anger hardened into action, and what consequences that action would bring. With a focus not on Meghan, but on the man who has stood beside her through every storm since they walked away from royal duties. Prince Harry had always been portrayed as her shield, her confidant, her partner in every battle. But as Megyn Kelly's mocking words spread across headlines and Meghan's fury boiled over into legal discussions, Harry's role became complicated. He was caught between loyalty to his wife and his instinct for survival in the brutal world of public opinion. For the first time, he found himself questioning not just the criticism itself, but the strategy Meghan wanted to pursue in response. Harry's history with the press had always been fraught. From his earliest years, he had blamed the tabloid media for hounding his mother, Princess Diana, to her death. That trauma never left him. Every camera flash, every journalist's headline carried echoes of the past. In Meghan's battles with the press, Harry had always been quick to align himself with her, seeing her pain as an extension of his own. When Meghan wept over headlines, Harry saw his mother's suffering reflected back at him. When Meghan threatened lawsuits, Harry supported her, remembering the times his family had stayed silent as the press shredded his mother's reputation. Silence, in his mind, was complicity. But the clash with Megyn Kelly felt different. This wasn't the British tabloids spinning salacious gossip or printing invasive photos. This was an American broadcaster mocking a Netflix series, a series that Harry himself knew was more entertainment than documentary. While he supported Meghan in creating it, he had reservations about how much of their lives were being dramatized for cameras. He had voiced concerns quietly during production, warning that they might expose themselves to ridicule if the series appeared staged. Now, watching the fallout, he couldn't help but feel those warnings had been prophetic. Inside their home, Harry tried to act as mediator when tensions with Meghan's advisors rose. He listened patiently to Meghan's anger, holding her hand during heated discussions, but when the lawyers spoke about the risks of legal action, he found himself leaning toward caution. He knew the American courts were a different arena from the British ones they had battled before. He also knew that Megyn Kelly thrived on conflict. Suing her could give her the perfect stage to cast Meghan as overreacting, intolerant of criticism, even tyrannical in her need for control. Harry wanted to protect Meghan, but he also wanted to protect the fragile public goodwill they still had left. This balancing act began to strain him. Sources close to the couple described Harry as increasingly withdrawn during those tense days. While Meghan pored over headlines and demanded updates, Harry often retreated to his study or went for long walks on the property. To outsiders, it might have looked like distance. To those who knew him, it was survival. He needed space to think, to reconcile his instinct to stand by Meghan with his doubt about whether this was a fight worth having. Harry's friends, those few who still spoke to him despite the couple's strained ties to the wider royal circle, reportedly advised caution. They told him that Kelly's words, while cruel, would fade in time. They reminded him that picking a fight with a media personality rarely ended well. Meghan, they said, should focus on future projects rather than dwelling on a single insult. But Meghan didn't see it that way. To her, Kelly's words were not a passing insult, but a direct threat to her credibility. Harry was torn. unable to dismiss his wife's pain, yet also unable to ignore the risks of escalation. The strain also showed in how the couple interacted with Netflix executives. Meghan pushed for the platform to defend her publicly, to issue statements framing the series as authentic storytelling unfairly attacked by critics. Harry, however, took a softer line. He argued that silence might serve them better, that letting Netflix stand aside could prevent the company from becoming further embroiled. The difference in approach became obvious during joint meetings, where Meghan spoke with passion and anger, while Harry's voice was steadier, quieter, almost resigned. Observers noted the contrast. Meghan the fighter, Harry the worrier. But loyalty remained Harry's defining trait. No matter his private doubts, he never left Meghan to face the storm alone. When she raged about Kelly, he sat beside her. When she floated legal strategies, he nodded, even when unconvinced. And when critics mocked not just Meghan but the couple as a unit, Harry bristled with protective anger. His conflict was internal, a tug-of-war between pragmatism and devotion. Outwardly, he was Meghan's ally. Inwardly, he was grappling with fear that every new battle chipped away at the fragile reputation they still had, fear that they were slipping further from the image they once hoped to cultivate as global changemakers rather than media fodder. The impact on Harry's relationship with the wider royal family added another layer. Reports circulated that aides at the palace quietly welcomed Kelly's critique, seeing it as validation of their own doubts about Meghan's version of events. Harry, who had already severed most ties with his father and brother, felt the sting of those whispers. To him, the laughter at Meghan's expense was not just aimed at her, but at him as well, a reminder that he was now defined less by his birthright and more by the controversies surrounding his wife. That realization deepened his determination to stand by her, even as his instincts told him that confrontation with Kelly would be a dangerous misstep. Behind the walls of Montecito, Harry's role was that of anchor, steady, calm, protective. Yet he was also a man increasingly caught in a web of contradictions. He wanted to protect Meghan from ridicule, but he knew lawsuits would make things worse. He wanted the world to see their love and their truth, but he recognized that the show itself blurred those lines. He wanted Meghan to feel empowered, but he feared her fury would lead them into yet another cycle of headlines that eroded the dignity they both craved. Chapter 6 closes with Harry standing in the shadows of Meghan's fury, a figure torn between past trauma and present loyalty. His voice of caution was quiet but persistent, even if often drowned out by Meghan's determination to fight. In the days ahead, his influence would matter. Whether as a calming force that urged restraint or as a devoted husband who followed his wife into battle despite his doubts. Either way, Harry's role in the drama was not passive. It was the struggle of a man who had left one royal cage only to find himself confined within another, built not of palace walls but of narratives, headlines, and the unforgiving spotlight of public opinion. Begins with the escalation Meghan had been hinting at since the first night Megyn Kelly's words went viral. The fury that consumed her soon transformed into a concrete plan, the threat of a lawsuit. By this stage, Meghan was no longer content with backroom debates and whispered discussions with advisors. She wanted action, something tangible that would send a signal not only to Kelly but to the world at large. If her name and her series could be reduced to a punchline with a single mocking phrase, then she would wield the sharpest weapon she believed she had: legal power. The process began quietly but quickly. Meghan's legal team, already familiar with representing her in battles against tabloids, was asked to examine the Kelly segment in excruciating detail. Lawyers dissected transcripts, analyzing whether Kelly's statements could be construed as defamatory rather than opinion. They weighed the possibility that Kelly's mocking phrase, "with lies Meghan," had crossed the line from commentary into an accusation of dishonesty that damaged Meghan's reputation. Every word, every inflection was scrutinized. Meghan pressed them for answers. Could she sue? And if she did, could she win? The legal team's response was cautious. They explained that in the United States, free speech protections are among the strongest in the world, particularly when it comes to commentary about public figures. The bar for defamation was high. Meghan would need to prove that Kelly had made knowingly false statements with actual malice. A mocking nickname, no matter how cruel, would almost certainly be seen as opinion rather than fact. The odds of success were slim. A lawsuit might generate headlines, but it would not guarantee vindication. In fact, it might invite even deeper scrutiny into Meghan's show, her past statements, and her credibility. Meghan listened but refused to be deterred. To her, the principle outweighed the odds. She argued that Kelly's words were not just opinion but an attack on her integrity, and allowing them to stand unchallenged would set a dangerous precedent. Meghan framed it as a broader fight, not just for herself but for all women who had been silenced by ridicule. This was more than a personal grudge. It was a battle over fairness, dignity, and truth. Her lawyers, though wary, began drafting cease and desist letters, designed less for courtroom battles and more for public theater. Even if no lawsuit followed, the threat of one could make headlines, signaling Meghan's refusal to be mocked without consequence. The letters were never intended to be quiet. Meghan's advisors leaked news of them to friendly media outlets, which reported that she was considering legal action against Megyn Kelly. The leaks achieved their purpose. Headlines once again revolved around Meghan, not just the mockery. For a brief moment, she shifted the narrative from humiliation to defiance. But Kelly was not the kind of figure to be cowed by legal threats. On her next broadcast, she doubled down, laughing at the idea of being sued and daring Meghan to follow through. Her defiance only amplified the story, making it clear that the feud was no longer a one-sided mockery, but an open war between two powerful women unwilling to back down. The lawsuit threat split public opinion. Meghan's supporters applauded her willingness to stand up for herself. They argued that ridicule disguised as commentary could have real consequences for someone's career and reputation, and Meghan had every right to fight back. They saw Kelly's words as bullying, another example of a woman in power being torn down for daring to speak her truth. On the other side, critics accused Meghan of being thin-skinned and litigious, unable to handle criticism despite willingly entering the entertainment industry. To them, the lawsuit threat proved that Meghan was more interested in control than in honesty, more eager to silence voices than to engage with them. The media frenzy grew. Legal experts appeared on talk shows, analyzing Meghan's chances in court and debating whether Kelly's words were actionable. Some dismissed the idea outright, calling the lawsuit threat a publicity stunt. Others noted that while Meghan might not win in court, the very act of filing could intimidate other critics, creating a chilling effect that discouraged mockery in the future. Meghan's team likely counted on this, understanding that even if she couldn't silence Kelly, she could make others think twice before following her lead. Netflix executives, already rattled by the mockery, grew more nervous as the lawsuit chatter gained traction. They worried that legal action would further entangle their brand in controversy. What had started as entertainment was morphing into a political and legal spectacle, one that could alienate viewers and damage relationships with other creators. Behind closed doors, Netflix urged caution, quietly pressing Meghan to avoid escalation. But Meghan, still seething, believed that not fighting back was equivalent to surrender. To her, the lawsuit threat was not just a tactic, it was a necessity. Harry's role during this period was conflicted but supportive. He worried about the consequences of legal escalation, but he also saw how deeply the ridicule hurt Meghan. To him, standing by her mattered more than public perception. He attended meetings with lawyers, asked questions about strategy, and listened as experts outlined the risks. Yet his body language betrayed his unease. He knew from past battles with the British press how exhausting and humiliating legal fights could become, and he feared repeating that cycle in America. Still, he chose loyalty over caution, backing Meghan even as doubts gnawed at him. The lawsuit threat also reignited old debates about Meghan's relationship with the royal family. Critics pointed out that while the monarchy had often absorbed criticism and mockery without legal retaliation, Meghan seemed unwilling to do the same. To them, this highlighted the cultural clash between royal tradition and Meghan's Hollywood approach to image control. The royals believed in the mantra, never complain, never explain. Meghan believed in confrontation. Kelly, by mocking her, had touched the nerve that exposed this difference to the world. As the days passed, the cease and desist letters remained in draft form, never publicly filed. Meghan's team debated endlessly about timing, impact, and optics. Would filing a lawsuit draw sympathy or ridicule? Would it protect her image or damage it further? Every option carried risk, every path forward uncertain. Yet Meghan refused to let go. Even if the lawsuit never materialized, the threat alone allowed her to project strength, to show the world she would not be reduced to silence by a mocking phrase. Chapter 7 ends with Meghan standing at the brink of escalation, her lawyers armed with letters, her advisors divided, her husband conflicted, and the world watching closely. Kelly's mockery had sparked a fire, but Meghan's lawsuit threatened to turn that fire into an inferno. The next stage of the drama would reveal whether Meghan's gamble would pay off, or whether the attempt to silence a critic would only amplify the very ridicule she wanted to erase. Chapter 8 begins in the streets of digital life, where public opinion becomes both a battlefield and a jury box. The moment Meghan's legal threats surfaced, the conversation surrounding her clash with Megyn Kelly transformed. What had been primarily laughter and mockery now evolved into a full-blown cultural debate. Social media feeds filled with threads dissecting the feud, television panels convened to discuss its implications, and news outlets churned out think pieces analyzing who was right, who was wrong, and what the fight represented on a broader scale. The reactions split sharply along familiar lines. On one side were Meghan's supporters, the loyal followers who had stood by her through her conflicts with the royal family and her battles with the British press. For them, Kelly's words were not just cutting commentary, but an example of how women in the public eye are often torn down for daring to tell their stories. Hashtags defending Meghan appeared on Twitter and Instagram, with phrases like "Stand with Meghan" trending for several days. Influencers and activists posted videos arguing that Kelly's attack was part of a pattern of misogyny and racism that Meghan had faced since the moment she entered the royal orbit. They saw her legal threats not as overreach, but as courage, a refusal to accept bullying disguised as critique. On the other side, critics saw things very differently. To them, Meghan's lawsuit threat proved exactly what Kelly had implied, that Meghan could not handle criticism. These voices argued that Meghan had willingly entered the entertainment world, a space where public scrutiny was inevitable, and now she was trying to silence anyone who dared question her. Mockery was fair game, they insisted, especially for someone who had built a multi-million-dollar brand on telling her story. In their view, Kelly was simply articulating what many people already believed, that with Love Meghan was more performance than truth. The hashtag #WithLiesMeghan continued to dominate, and defenders of Kelly used it relentlessly as a badge of resistance against what they perceived as Meghan's attempt to control speech. Television talk shows leaned into the feud. Morning programs framed it as a clash between two powerful women with very different approaches to media. Panelists debated whether Kelly had gone too far or whether Meghan's reaction was disproportionate. Late-night comedians found endless material, blending jokes about the Netflix series with commentary on the lawsuit threat. Every punchline reinforced the sense that Meghan was caught in a cycle where her anger only fueled more ridicule. The divide wasn't limited to ordinary audiences. Celebrities and public figures also weighed in. Some sided with Meghan, posting messages of solidarity and emphasizing the importance of protecting one's reputation in the face of unfair attacks. Others subtly or openly backed Kelly, praising her for saying what others were too afraid to say. This split among public figures mirrored the larger cultural conversation and ensured that the story remained alive in headlines longer than Meghan's team might have hoped. Within Meghan's camp, the public reaction was studied obsessively. Her advisors compiled reports on trending hashtags, influential voices, and the tone of media coverage. They noted where support was strongest and where criticism was fiercest. Meghan herself followed the discourse closely, alternating between relief when she saw defenders and rage when she saw detractors. She grew frustrated that the conversation seemed less about the actual content of her series and more about whether she was lying, whether she was too sensitive, whether she was overreaching. To her, this was the ultimate injustice. Her work, her story, reduced to a binary debate fueled by ridicule. For Kelly, the public reaction was validation. She saw the flood of commentary as proof that she had struck a chord. Her audience grew as people tuned in not just to hear her continue mocking Meghan, but to watch how she handled the backlash. Kelly doubled down, releasing follow-up segments in which she laughed at Meghan's threats and mocked her supporters as blind loyalists. Her refusal to back down only strengthened her position among critics of Meghan, who applauded her fearlessness. The international press amplified the divide. In Britain, tabloids gleefully covered the feud, often framing Kelly as a truth-teller exposing Meghan's alleged manipulations. In the United States, coverage was more mixed, with some outlets framing Meghan as a victim of media cruelty and others highlighting the risks of her combative approach. In other parts of the world, the story was covered less as celebrity drama and more as an example of how modern media operates, where narratives can be built, mocked, and dismantled in real time across global platforms. The public's role in the feud added fuel to Meghan's anger. Every mocking meme, every trending hashtag, every comedian's joke deepened her sense that her reputation was slipping out of her control. And yet, the more she tried to push back, the more attention the ridicule received. This paradox left her trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. Silence felt like surrender, but speaking out felt like digging the hole deeper. Among her supporters, however, there was real passion. They defended her with long posts, heartfelt essays, and emotional videos. They pointed to her history of being unfairly targeted, her struggles with mental health, and her efforts to build a new life outside the constraints of monarchy. They argued that Kelly's words weren't harmless jokes, but part of a larger campaign to discredit Meghan at every turn. These defenses created communities of solidarity online, where Meghan's fans comforted one another and reinforced their loyalty. Yet even within these communities, frustration grew over how easily the narrative had been hijacked. By this stage, the feud was no longer just about Meghan and Kelly. It had become a cultural flashpoint. It raised questions about free speech, about the responsibilities of broadcasters, about the boundaries between criticism and cruelty. It also raised questions about Meghan herself. Could she survive in Hollywood if she couldn't tolerate mockery? Was her drive to control the narrative undermining the authenticity she claimed to value? These questions dominated the discourse, leaving Meghan and Kelly as symbols in a larger debate about truth and power in the modern age. Chapter 8 ends with the image of two women standing on opposite sides of a cultural battlefield, their supporters cheering them on, their critics sharpening their attacks, and the world watching with fascination. Meghan's threat of legal action had not silenced the mockery. If anything, it had amplified it, drawing in more voices, more headlines, more scrutiny. What had started as a single phrase uttered in a studio had exploded into a global conversation, one that neither Meghan nor Kelly could fully control. The next chapter will explore how the royal family, watching from a distance, responded to the chaos, and whether their silence carried more meaning than any statement could.